Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name's Rory and today I wanted to talk to you about this camera, the Panasonic S5. Today I wanted to talk to you and review it from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker. Now, just to give you a bit of a background, my history with wedding filmmaking and filmmaking in general was that me and my wife Casey travelled overseas for a year, and while we were overseas, I fell in love with filmmaking. When we came back, I decided that the retail job that I was in for the last decade wasn't for me. I wanted to get out of it, and so I started my own production company. With that production company, I've been filming weddings since 2019. And now it's my primary source of income. So for me, it's really, really important that I have really solid and reliable equipment that's easy to use in a run and gun scenario and provides me with nothing less than excellent image quality. Now, I've had the Panasonic S5 now for a few months, and in that time, I've had a chance to film about 10 weddings with it. I've been able to spend enough time with it to get to know it inside out, back to front. I know what I absolutely love about this camera, and I also know about the things that I feel like could be improved upon with future iterations of it. Now, just so that you guys know, this review is going to be from the perspective of a professional wedding filmmaker who relies on their equipment to make money to put food on the table. So take everything I say with that in mind. I should also say that every bit of filmmaking equipment that I own, I've purchased with my own money. I've never had any sponsorship on this channel at the moment. That might change in the future, but at the moment, there's no sponsorship on the channel. Over the years, I've owned cameras from Nikon, Fuji, Canon, Sony, and Panasonic. So I'm definitely no fanboy of any one particular brand. But at the moment, Panasonic cameras work really well for me, and I really do love the product that they're putting out right now. So, in order to talk about the current camera, the Panasonic S5, I should probably talk about the previous camera that I had, which was an absolute beast of a camera, which was the Panasonic GH5. That camera was one of the all-time classic cameras that didn't revolutionize the filmmaking industry, but so many wedding filmmakers were using it. Before we had the Canon R5 and the Sony A7S III and the Panasonic S1H, your options were probably either to have a cinema camera like the Canon C200 or go for something like the Panasonic GH5. It could shoot in 10-bit, it had 4K 60, full HD and 120 frames a second, and it had really proper cinema camera features like zebras, Vlog, peaking, SynchroScan, and a whole bunch of other things. The GH5 was my first proper camera that I used in my business, and I still do love it and use it to this day. However, it does have a few issues that I didn't love about it. My main issues that I had with it was that the 4K 60 could only be shot in 8-bit, which did present issues when you were grading it with 10-bit footage. The autofocus in the GH5 is absolutely horrendous. It was unusable. And it's not a good camera for low light. If you didn't have lights with you and it went dark, forget about it. This is because of the smaller sensor. Also, because of the smaller sensor, it was really difficult to achieve a shallow depth of field look unless you had some really awesome lenses like the Voigtlander 0.95s. Then along comes Panasonic X5. The S5 for me feels like a natural evolution from the GH5 into a full framing ecosystem, and it improves the camera in pretty much every area. It's still got all the great cinema type features of the GH5 like zebras, peaking, but it also increases it to like a full Vlog. As standard, you don't need to pay extra for it, and it has a huge 14 stops of dynamic range. The S5 is also now a full frame sensor, which allows us to have that like really nice shallow depth of field. And that sensor also has dual native ISO, which means that it's really, really good in low light. And with all of that, it's in the same package size as the original GH5. Like the difference between the camera sizes is almost nothing. So to start off the review, let's talk about the build quality of the S5. When it comes to weather sealing, it says that it's got the same weather sealing as the GH5. I haven't had to test the weather sealing in the S5 yet, but I have had to test it in the GH5. I've filmed ceremonies where it absolutely bucketed down with rain for the entire ceremony, and the camera was fine. Like, it got to the other end of it, there was no water in anything. All the weather sealing did exactly what it said it was going to do, and I would expect that the S5 would do exactly the same. Uh, the Panasonic S5, it's got metal on its body all over it. It feels really solid in the hand. It feels like it's got a really solid construction. I still put it in a cage because I always like to protect my cameras in a cage, but it does feel like if you dropped it, you wouldn't kill it. And it's also got that flip out screen, which is really handy, not just for when you're filming yourself, but also when you need to stand to the side when you're filming speeches or something, so you can monitor your framing from a bit of a distance without having to stand right behind the camera. Now, as I said before, the sensor in the Panasonic S5 is a full frame sensor, so it does allow you to get that really nice shallow depth of field, even when you're using a bit higher apertures than what you might be used to in the Micro Four Thirds system. So if you're using like f3, f4, you're still going to get like a nice depth of field if you're using a longer focal length. The sensor, as I said before, it's got dual native ISO. So in Vlog, that's ISO 640 and ISO 4000. I've pushed it well above that, right up into 12,000 and more in really low light, and you get some really incredible low light images with very little grain. By nature of the sensor, when you're shooting in 4K 60, you do have to deal with a 1.5 times crop, which to me isn't a big issue because it does mean that with a lot of lenses, you do get that little bit of extra reach. In this camera is absolutely beautiful, and with 10-bit you really have the option to push the colors as far as you want without suffering from any banding. During weddings, I pretty much shoot exclusively in 4K in either 24 frames a second or 60 frames a second, but always in 10-bit. Be aware though that the 10-bit does have a 30-minute record limit. I've never had to push it beyond this. I've never found it to be an issue. Where I am in Australia, most ceremonies don't last longer than about 20 minutes, so it really isn't that big of an issue for me. And during the speeches, if they do go for longer than that, there's always an opportunity to stop the camera and restart it in between each guest speaking. It doesn't create any extra work in post, so it doesn't present a problem for me at all. The fact that the S5 has the full Vlog and not Vlog L opens up an entire new world as far as dynamic range goes. The GH5 only had Vlog L, which is basically like Vlog Lite, and honestly it wasn't great. I never really liked it, and I always found myself using Cine-Like D with the GH5, but with the Panasonic S5 I now shoot almost entirely with Vlog. It's really important to understand that if you are shooting in Vlog, you need to think about two things. First of all, you need a really good Vlog to Rec 709 conversion LUT to use in post. And you also need an excellent Vlog to Rec 709 monitoring LUT to use in the camera. Otherwise, it's really hard to nail focus. Luckily, I've tested quite a few for you, and I can tell you that the one that I love and use the most is the one that's created by Gamut, by the team at White and Reverie. I'll leave a link down below where you can pick up a copy of that LUT. I've got no affiliation with them. I don't get anything for you buying them. I've just found that that one is the best one. As far as image quality though, the issues do start to appear once you drop the quality down to 1080p. In the GH5, the 1080p was a downsampled 4K image, which meant the image that you got was still fantastic. But in the S5, they used some sort of, I don't know, pixel binning or line skipping or something like that. And what that does is it actually degrades the 1080p image quality quite a bit. And you do end up with, it's not a bad image, but it's not as good as what it should be. For this reason, I very, very rarely use 1080p on the S5. The only time I ever use 1080p is when I'm using like the variable frame rates when I'm shooting 120 frames per second. But other than that, I'm pretty much using exclusively 4K, which, I mean, if you've got a camera that can do that, you should be using it anyway. Why not use the best option that you have? On the variable frame rate, I never go above 120 frames a second either, because beyond that, the picture really starts to fall apart to the point where I just wouldn't feel comfortable using it in a wedding film. I only really even use the 120 frames a second for a few seconds at a time. So now let's talk about autofocus. Now, Panasonic always gets a really, really bad rap for their autofocus, and in the past I would 100% agree with them. The GH5 autofocus sucked. However, on the Panasonic S5, provided that you're using like Lumix Panasonic branded lenses, the autofocus is actually good. There's only a few times that I struggle with the autofocus, and that's when I'm either not using a Panasonic lens, like the Sigma L-mount lenses that I have, or I'm trying to focus in very, very low light, or I'm trying to focus with a subject that's really strongly backlit. Um, this autofocus is contrast based, so it's not really surprising that if you're trying to focus with a really backlit subject, it's going to struggle. Because as you all know, when you backlight a subject, it loses a lot of contrast, and yeah, it makes perfect sense that the focus is going to struggle. Overall, I really like the autofocus, given where it's come from. And when I'm in a situation where I can control it, I do tend to use it quite a bit, even when I'm at a wedding. That being said, for moments that are absolutely clutch, like when the bride's walking down the aisle, the first kiss, anytime during the ceremony or the first dance, I'm always using manual focus. I have tested the autofocus in these situations, and it worked fine, but I still just don't trust it. So I really wish Panasonic would just come out and make something that's really good like what Sony or Canon has, but they haven't. It's adequate. I would happily use it for some situations, like if you're filming guests mingling or something where it's not like a really critical shot. But yeah, still use manual focus. It is still handy to use the autofocus when you just want the camera to do a little bit of the heavy lifting for you. So yeah, now let's talk about battery life. The batteries in this camera are a lot smaller than the ones in like the S1 or the S1H. But even so, during a wedding, I tend to only go through about 3 batteries. This isn't too bad at all when you consider that when I was using the GH5, I'd probably go through about 5 batteries on a wedding day. The really, really great thing about the Panasonic S5 is that you can actually run the camera directly from a power bank. So if you plug a USB-C cable from your power bank into the camera and just chuck the power bank in your pocket or something, you can run it pretty much as long as the power bank goes. So I always carry a few power banks with me on a wedding day because you never know when you're going to run it, like when a battery's going to fail or something. So it's always a really handy backup to have, especially early on when I first got the camera and batteries just weren't available yet. I basically ran an entire wedding day with it off a power bank just sitting in my pocket, and it worked flawlessly. So yeah, now let's talk about the audio that comes out of the Panasonic S5. Every filmmaker knows that the audio is way more important than the visuals. I'm not even going to bother talking about the onboard audio because you're never going to use it. So the onboard audio, it's not too bad, but it's still going to suck compared to a proper microphone. So just so that you guys are aware, this entire video, it's obviously filmed on the Panasonic S5, which is why I don't have it in my hand. But just above me here, I actually have a Rode Video Micro that's boomed going into the camera. So the preamps on the Panasonic cameras are actually very good, but they do run very hot. I've found that across all the Panasonic cameras that I've owned. So I always have it turned down to negative 12 dB. And even with that, I do worry that it might actually peak sometimes. So I try never to rely on any audio that's going straight into the camera for things like vows and speeches. I've always got a backup, like a lav pack that's sitting on somebody. I've actually just started using the new Rode Wireless Go 2s, which record internally, which so far are really good, or like an external recorder plugged into the PA or something like that. In an absolute worst case scenario, you can probably use a small shotgun mic into the camera, but I wouldn't want to rely on that. So the next thing that I want to talk to you about is the IBIS. Personally, I think that the IBIS in the S5 is really good. I find it to be just as good as the Panasonic S5. I can get really steady shots handheld, which is great because about 95% of my day is spent either handheld or on a monopod. I barely ever use my gimbal anymore. I use it for about 3 shots during the day. I use it for the dress shot. I use it to shoot the venue, like some establishing shots, and I use it for the first dance. And other than that, it doesn't get used at all. So yeah, I find the IBIS to be more than adequate. Okay, now let's talk about lens choices. This is where things do get a little bit tricky. There's actually quite a lot of options when it comes to L-mount lenses, but not as many as something like Sigma or Canon. There's also not very many budget options. Sigma have some great cheaper lenses with their 35mm 1.4 and 85mm 1.4. However, while the image quality is really beautiful out of those lenses, and I do have the 35mm 1.4, it won't autofocus at all, unless you're using it for pictures. But for video, forget about it. The kit lens that comes with the S5, the 20-60, it's pretty slow and it's probably not suited for professional work, but it's a good all-round lens. It'll get you by in a pinch, but it's not amazing. For the weddings that I'm shooting, at the moment I'm using almost exclusively the Lumix 24-70 2.8. It's got really good build quality, excellent color rendering, it's super sharp, it's fast enough at 2.8 that you can use it in everything except for the lowest of light. And it gives you a really huge focal range, especially when you consider that you have the 1.5 times crop available to you. So you essentially have the option of a 24-105 lens. That being said, it's a very expensive lens, and it's much more expensive than similar offerings from both Canon and Sony. So with all that said, let's talk about a few of the things I don't like about this camera, because there are a couple. I really like this camera mostly. The EVF on the camera sucks. You can't see focus or anything. I don't know why they wouldn't just spend a bit of money and put a better one in. Yeah, when you consider the competition, there's no reason why it shouldn't be a better one. Same goes with autofocus. I don't know why they don't just make a good autofocus system for Panasonic that just works. There's no anti-aliasing filter. Only the S1H in this lineup has it, so technically speaking, this camera will be more into moire, but I haven't run into that problem yet. But if I do get a groom with a check shirt on one day or something, I might be cursing myself later on for having the camera. But yeah, those are the main things that do concern me about the camera. Other than that, I really, really love it. So let's talk about the value and a bit of a conclusion. So currently the Panasonic S5 is just under $2,000 on B&H, compared to the GH5 at $1,300 on B&H. So if you compare that to two of the most popular current wedding video cameras, that would be the Canon R5 at $3,900 US and the Sony A7S III at $3,500. Yes, those two cameras are definitely better than the Panasonic S5. There is no doubt about that. But you need to consider more than just the video specs. One thing that we all tend to do in this industry, we all tend to chase that technology rabbit. And the more you do that, the further away from you it's going to get, because you can never catch it. There's always going to be something better just around the corner. So what you really do need to be looking at, if you're serious about your business, is your return on investment. So at $2,000 for a camera body, I've made that money back plus more in just one wedding. So this is going to be a camera body that will last me for the next several years. It provides like amazing image quality. It's got the technology in it that it's not going to be outdated for a very long time. So when I'm purchasing things like new cameras or new lenses and stuff, there's a few things that I do need to consider as from a business point of view. The first is it going to improve the quality of my films? The second is, will this add more value to the couples that I'm working for? And the final one is, does it allow me to charge more money for my films and my services, and therefore recoup my investment faster? In the case of the Panasonic S5, it does tick all three of those boxes. I'm not going to pretend that it's the best camera out there, because depending on your needs will depend on what is the best camera. But from a value for money perspective, I believe that it takes them a serious beating. For me, something like 8K isn't important. 4K at 120 frames a second isn't important either. With the Panasonic S5, I'm able to record an amazing picture quality that will help me make beautiful films for my couples, that they'll be able to go back and look on for years to come. So that's the thing that's really important for me when I buy new gear. So there you have it, guys. That is my review of the Panasonic S5 from the perspective of a wedding filmmaker. If you do want to check out some of my wedding films on YouTube, my wedding channel is called RJ Visuals, which I'll link somewhere around here. But yeah, as always, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you found this video useful, please hit the like button down below. Once again, YouTube has changed their algorithm, and hitting that like button really does help my channel get in front of more people. If you want to see more of my content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe button down below. And yeah, I'll catch you guys in the next video. Bye.